to chapter 30, verse 4. It says, V'isha, chapter 30, verse 4, Parshas Matos. Matos is always read Bein HaMitzarim, between the straits. It's always read during the 3 weeks. So it says, V'isha ki sidor neder la'Hashem. If a woman will take a vow, v'asra isar, she will prohibit something upon herself. V'veis avia benura, in her father's home while she is young, while she's a minor. Rashi says, it doesn't mean she's in his house. It means, well, she's under her father's authority. That means to say, when she is, before she becomes an adult. Let me just take a step back with everybody. There are 3 stages of law as it relates to a girl. Under the age of 12, she's a minor. She can't take a vow. Meaning her vow is not applicable. Above the age of 12 and a half, she's an adult, and her father has no authority over her. Between the ages of 12 and 12 and a half, she's what's called a nara. She's in her youth, and then her father can annul her vows on that day. It says, Rashi says, binura means when she is not a minor nor an adult, because a minor can't take a vow at all. And an adult, her father doesn't have the ability to annul her vows. So she has to be in this in-between stage. Who's a minor with respect to vows? The rabbi said 11 years old and 1 day, her vows are examined. If she knows who she's making a vow, then her vow is a binding vow. 12 years old and 1 day, we don't need to check. So basically, the rabbis, what I gave you was general law. But now Rashi's quoting the Gemara from Nida, that even though that the point with the vows is, at what point does she know to whom she is vowing? So from 11 years old, we ask her, do you understand what you're vowing about? And then from 12 years old, we don't even need to ask her. But once she reaches the age of 12 and a half, her vow is automatically binding if she's still living in her father's home and if she's not married. If she's not married, that's what the Rashi says. Yes, Mordechai. So Rashi said this yesterday. A vow does not mention the name of God. The question was, do you have to mention the name of God when taking a vow? And Rashi said yesterday, no, that you don't need to. You take a vow that I will not eat or that I won't do something, but not necessarily to mention the name of God. So that's what Rashi says. You could use sometimes a nickname of something that's called a yadot, a handle. Well, you have to get the chumash as, right? Those are the Talmuds. Maybe Ezra, bring a couple more in case some other students arrive. Okay, so the answer is to your question is Mordechai, it's not necessary to mention the name of God in order for the vow to be binding. But if you want to know all the laws of what makes a vow binding, you have to review Tractate Nedarim. We did that in the Daf Yomi maybe around a year ago, I think. I don't remember exactly. So now the next verse states, V'imhini avia excuse me. V'shama avia es nidra, if the father hears her vows, ve'esara asher asra al-nafsha, and the prohibition she takes upon herself, ve'acharish la avia, if the father is silent, then v'kamu kol nidara, then all her vows will be upheld. Chol isar asher asra al-nafsha yakum. So basically, if the father hears her vow, and on that day he's silent, then he can no longer annul her vow. He's got the one day dispensation to annul her vow. And we'll see also her husband. 1 day to annul her vow. And if the father restrained her on the day he heard about it, then meaning to say the father could annul it on that day. Hashem will forgive her because her father has restrained her. And this is one of my favorite Rashis. It's based upon the Gemara in Kedushin 81b. This is one of my favorite things. First we'll do the first Rashi. Let's say the father held her back from sinning. How so? He nullified it for her. That's what it means. If you held her back from sinning. Now let me ask you a question. Okay, this is the Geshmak question. It's not my question, it's the Gemara and Kedushin's question. The question is as follows. Kobe, I'm going to ask this question to you. A girl who makes a vow, her father has the right to annul the vow on the day that he hears it. And if he does that, the vow is not binding. Let's say the girl says, I vow I'm not going to eat meat anymore. The father hears about this, and right when he hears about it, he annuls her vow. The girl doesn't know the father has annulled her vow. He doesn't know. She doesn't know her father has annulled her vow. The next day, the girl and her friends, she's at her friend's house, and they're making a barbecue, and she has a hamburger. Is she allowed to have the hamburger? Well, her father annulled her vow. So technically speaking, there is nothing wrong with her having the hamburger because her father has annulled her vow. But she doesn't know her father has annulled her vow. She doesn't know that the vow is annulled. So she eats the hamburger thinking she's sinning, but her father has annulled the vow. You follow that? So does she need to repent for that? So
is there a prior question though, which is what sort of vow are we talking about? And you gave that obviously that's a good example.
So the Gemara discusses the type of vows that are relevant, that can be annulled. The Gemara goes into detail about it. The husband can annul the vows that relate to the husband and wife. The father has the right more latitude in annulling the vows.
I guess what I'm saying is specifically, just with that, if you were to stick with that example, there's no reason Hashem would care whether she was a vegetarian or not.
Except for that, she make the vow.
She was violating. Meaningless pledge to herself.
For sure. Not only that, you can't make a vow about a mitzvah. You can't make a vow that I'm going to keep Shabbos. That vow wouldn't be applicable. You can't make a vow about something that's already listed in the Torah. So we're talking about a case where she does not know that the vow she made was annulled, but her father had annulled it. And yet she goes ahead acting like as though she's sinning, but she doesn't realize it's not a sin because the father has annulled the vow. So the question is, the vort is, does she need to atone for this sin? Yeah, Greg. There's a Veira ni kavana. Beautiful. Nice formulation. Very nice, Greg. Yeah. Father doesn't have to tell her. First of all, maybe we didn't even get a chance, but he doesn't need to tell her he annulled it because he's let's say she's a repeat offender. He knows she can't keep it. He doesn't want the house to be vegetarian, whatever reason. So he's waiting for the Shabbos table, and she says, "Oh, I can't eat it." He says, "Actually, you can." So that's like the old joke. It's not a joke. I'm not going to say it. It's not funny. Anyway, so what does it mean? Rashi says, and God will forgive her. What's the verse speaking of? Be'isha shenadra benazir, a woman who took a vow to be a Nazirite. Woman who took a vow to be a Nazirite. Vishama ba'ala, and her husband heard. Veheferwa, and he nullified it for her. Vihilo yada, she doesn't know. Va'overes al nidra, and she violates her vow. Vishote yayin, she drinks the wine. Umatame lamesim, she took a vow that she's going to be a Nazirite. She took a vow that she's not going to be able to come in contact with the dead. She doesn't know that her father has annulled the vow and she can drink wine. Zuhi sheitzricha slicha, this is the one who needs forgiveness. Afal pishu mufar, even though the vow is nullified. Ve'ema mufarin tzrichan slicha, kal v'chomer v'she'ena mufarin. If these vows which were nullified, if she needs to atone for them, how much more so for the vows that are not nullified. Rashi here does not cite what I thought the Gemara tells us in Kedushin, that Rabbi Akiva, it says when Rabbi Akiva came to this teaching, he started to cry. This is, I believe, on the bottom of Kedushin. Maybe this appears twice in the Gemara, because I remember one time on the bottom of 81b, but another time I remember on the top of the page. So on Amud Aleph. But Rabbi Akiva said, when Rabbi Akiva saw this, he started to cry. He said, if we have to atone even for those sins which we have not committed, how much more so do we have to atone for those sins which we have committed? So Rabbi Akiva came to this teaching, he started to cry when he came to this Sifri. But we see from here the Geschmack teaching that even though she's technically not sinning, she needs to atone for it. Like Greg was saying.
That's also interesting. I don't know whether we're going to talk about sons.
Yeah.
I don't know if that was discussed.
Yeah.
Obviously, in sort of contemporary terms, you might say it's infantilizing her to say, even if she's over 12, so she could make a vow, but her father's allowed to annul it. That's kind of this idea the father knows best. But if we're also saying, but in fact, she has to be forgiven, that means it's actually taken seriously as something, her own sort of free will is taken seriously.
That's a very nice point. Yeah. So Ben is a very good point that she still requires forgiveness. She has agency. It does not apply to sons. And the reason why it applies, it is kind of infantilizing her and saying that he's responsible. He's the man of the house. Father knows best. And then even worse, husband knows best. That's when we're going to get to a husband and his wife. That's even, a father and a girl who's a minor, you could understand. But as it relates to a wife, it's more disturbing to the modern ear. And that's the next verse. But the basic point is that this was matters that affected the whole household, and they must have been worried that people will get into a religious frenzy and accept certain things upon themselves, like they become a Nazirite, and that makes a huge hot mess for the family. Let's say the family has a home on a cemetery. Now they'll have to move. Yeah, Jerry, you had a question.
Yes. What is the rule about a young boy? Does he have agency from birth on or not?
No. So the young boy does not have agency from birth on. He only has agency from when he's old enough for his vows to be checked, which ironically is from the age of 12. The boy is 1 year before he becomes a man, and 1 year before the girl becomes a man. So actually, the boy at the age of 12 has kind of the same law. No, the girl at the age of 12, her vows need to be approved by her father, or he has to not reject them. But the boy at the age of 12, we have to check it to make sure he knows what he's talking about. But the father can annul her vows.
And the father can annul the boy's vows, correct?
The father cannot annul the boy's vows. Cannot.
Well, let's say at age 10, the boy makes a vow.
Then it doesn't take effect because he's a
minor.
He's a minor, so it doesn't take effect.
I see. Okay. Thank you.
Okay, so now we go on. Next verse. Okay, it says, Vishama Vima Yosi El Ish. Let's say the woman will be married. She'll be married to a man, Undarea, and her vows are upon her. Omivtas Tifasah, or there's Chumashim here, Rafi, or an utterance of her lips, Asher Asral Navsha. So we're talking about a case where she prohibited here. Ezra, please give a Gemara Chumash to Rafi. So if she'll be married and she'll make a vow or prohibit something. Rashi says, what kind of woman are we referring to? This refers to a woman who's called an arusa. So now we have to explain this. And according to the Torah, there are two stages of the marriage. There's the betrothal and the full marriage. The betrothal is a engagement, a formal engagement, where she is promised to be wed, but they live in separate homes. But if the marriage would break apart, if the engagement would break apart, he'd have to divorce her, and she need a bill of divorce. Argue about whether or not she gets a ketubah. That's discussed in Tractate Ketubah. But so this idea that he can annul her vows, that refers to when they are just engaged. So nowadays we do everything all at once under the chuppah. We do the erusin and the nisuin at the same time, basically one after the other. But in those days, they were done separately. So it means if she gets betrothed, he can annul her vows. And it's telling us that when she's in arusa, both her father and her husband have to combine together to annul her vow. If one of them annulled the vow and not the other, the vow is still upheld. They share in their responsibilities for her. What are some of the differences between an erusa and a nesua, a betrothed? That the betrothed woman is, first of all, she's not able to live with her husband. Second of all, she cannot eat the truma. If she's betrothed to a Kohen, she can't eat the truma while she's still living in her father's home. And he also doesn't have to provide her with support. He doesn't have to pay for it because she's still living in her father's home. Okay, so under those circumstances, if she takes the vow while she's still in her father's home, now, if one of them upholds the vow, for sure, the vow is upheld. So either one kind of has veto power and they have to work together. Sure, they'll work it out. Okay, next verse. V'shama isha b'yom shemo. If her husband hears on the day of her hearing, v'charishlon is silent, v'kamu nidara v'asara asher asral nafshay yakumu. And then her vows are upheld. Basically, if her husband hears and he doesn't annul it, the vows are upheld. V'im biyom shemoa isha, pasuk tet, verse 9. If on the day, by the way, now that everybody's here, I hope everybody's ready tomorrow for the big push-up challenge. Ezra, you ready for that? Yeah, it's going to be very big. The push-up Olympics. The winner is going to get the trophy. We have a trophy that goes to the winner of the push-up challenge. It's whoever can do the most push-ups in 1 minute tomorrow. Push-up Olympics after davening. So I recommend caffeinating heavily. Okay. If on the day that our husband hears, he restrains or I annuls it. They first need I annuls the vow. So the husband can cancel it and then God will forgive her. Verse 10. But if she would be v'neder almano grusha, let's say it would be the vow of a widow or a divorcee, anything that she vows upon herself will be valid. Because if she's a divorcee or a widow, she's for sure not under the authority of her father nor of her husband. And Rashi reminds us that we're talking about an almana min hanesuin. She's a widow from the full marriage. Of almana min ha'erusin, if she's from the betrothal, and once the husband dies, she goes back to her father's house. Nisrokna reshus la'av. Her authority to nullify has been emptied out from the husband to the father. Vim beis ishana dara, but if she vowed in her husband's house, or she takes prohibits something with an oath. Rashi says here we're talking about a fully married woman. Mishama isha v'acharishla, and her husband hears and he's silent. Let me just summarize this because I don't want people to be confused. There's 3 stages of annulment of vows. There's when a woman is in her, well, there's actually 4 stages or 5 stages. Let me go over the 5 stages. There's when a girl is under the age of 11. When she's under the age of 11, any vow she makes, what's the answer about such a vow? Not valid because she's too young. From the age of 11 to 12, what's the story about a vow she makes? What's the story about a vow she makes from the age of 11 to 12? Yeah, but before the father can annul it, we have to investigate her to see if she understands the vow. And then if she understands the vow father can annul it, but only on the day of the vow, the day he hears the vow. Then from age 12 to 12 and a half, what's the law there? From 12 to 12 and a half, we're going to say that if she makes a vow, the father could annul it on the day he hears it. But let's say from 12 to 12 and a half, she's engaged, she's betrothed to a man. Then she makes a vow, who can annul it? It requires both the father and the husband to jointly annul the vow. Let's say then she's fully married. Who can annul the vow? Just the husband, and only on the day he hears it. Let's say she's divorced or widowed from that relationship once she's fully married. Then who can annul her vow? Not the father, and obviously not the husband, because she has no husband. So that she fits into a different category, like all the rest of us. She would have to go to a scholar to annul the vow at that point, or a court. So that's where I just wanted to summarize it because I was worried that people might be getting lost during this whole discussion.
It's helpful.
Yeah. Appreciate it. Now verse 12. V'shama isha, if her husband hears it, v'acharishla, and he's silent, if he doesn't annul it, then her vows are valid. If the husband annuls it on the day he hears it, then then her vows are canceled. Her husband has annulled them, and God will forgive her. Why is God forgiving her? Why does she need atonement? If she doesn't know, like we said, if she doesn't know if she doesn't know her vow was canceled, then she still did the prohibition. Now we say verse 14. Kol neder v'kol shvuas isar la'anos nafesh ishayi kimena v'ishayi firen. Any vow, now it's telling us what kind of vows can the husband annul. What kind of vows can the husband annul? Any vow which is afflicting her soul, which is a vow of affliction, that's what the husband can annul. Look at Rashi. Rashi says, because it says the husband annuls the vow. So I might think all vows. Says the verse, La nos nafesh, that cause personal affliction. Can only annul those vows that affect the husband. Like what? So the Tracting the Durham says that there's 2 aspects. There's vows of personal affliction and vows that affect the husband. Like let's say she vows that they're not going to, she takes a vow that my husband and I are not going to be together anymore. The husband can annul that vow, even though it's not an affliction for her. It might be respite for her. Nevertheless, the husband can annul that vow. You had a question? Who had a question, Jerry?
No.
Oh, okay. I thought you were asking. Okay, anyway, we're up to the point in our Torah study where it's time to stop and daven mincha. A big shkoyal to everybody.
Right.